Ambiguity effect. The ambiguity effect describes how we tend to avoid options that we consider to be ambiguous or missing information. Assembly bonus effect. Assembly bonus effect is a term that means producing an outcome as a group that is superior to the results that could have been achieved by every single individual effort from members of the same group. The gain in performance is caused by the way the members fit together. Social facilitation. People do better on tasks when they are with other people rather than when they are doing the task alone. Barnum effect. It's a common psychological phenomenon whereby individuals give high accuracy ratings to descriptions of their personalities that are supposedly tailored specifically to them, but are in fact vague and general enough to apply to a wide range of people. It could be a part of the reason why people accept paranormal beliefs such as astrology and fortune-telling. Birthday number effect. It's the subconscious tendency of people to prefer the numbers on the date of their birthday over other numbers. It's said that the effect is most prominent for numbers over 12. Name letter effect. Similar to the birthday number effect, it's the tendency of people to prefer the letters in their name over other ones. Boomerang effect. It refers to the unintended consequences of an attempt to persuade, resulting in the adoption of an opposing position instead. Typically, the more aggressively something is presented, the more likely it is that people will want to do the opposite. Booba Kiki effect. It's a mental association between certain speech sounds and certain visual shapes. Most narrowly, it is the tendency for people, when presented with the nonsense words booba and kiki, to associate booba with a rounded shape and kiki with a spiky shape. Diffusion of responsibility. It refers to the decreased responsibility for action each member of a group feels when they are part of a group. Bystander effect. Individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim in the presence of other people for many reasons, such as diffusion of responsibility and ambiguity about who should start to offer help and who's more qualified for it. Cheerleader effect. It's also known as the group attractiveness effect, and it's a bias that causes people to perceive individuals as a little bit more attractive in a group than when seen alone. Cocktail party effect. It refers to the phenomenon wherein the brain focuses a person's attention on a particular stimulus, usually auditory, while excluding a range of other stimuli from conscious awareness. Contrast effect. It's the enhancement or diminishment, relative to normal, of perception or cognition when presented with an immediately previous simultaneous exposure to a stimulus of lesser or greater value. Crespi effect. Imagine a rat in a maze that has to find food. If a rat is given a big reward first and a small reward afterwards, it'll run slower than a rat that has been given a small reward from the start. Curse of knowledge. It's a bias that happens when someone who is knowledgeable about something unknowingly thinks that others also have the same knowledge or point of view as him, causing misunderstandings. Diderot effect. It's a phenomenon that occurs when acquiring a new possession leads to a spiral of consumption that results in the acquisition of even more possessions in a chain reaction. Einstellung. Your old habits can blind you to new, better, and simpler solutions. Endowment effect. People tend to value items that they own more highly than they would if they did not belong to them. Cryptomnesia. It occurs when a forgotten memory returns without being recognized as such by the subject, who believes it is something new and original. It can cause unintentional plagiarism. DRM paradigm. The DRM paradigm happens when a list of related words is presented to someone, and when he's asked to recall them, he falsely remembers other related words that weren't there. Florence Nightingale effect. It's a trope where a caregiver falls in love with their patient, even if very little communication or contact takes place outside of basic care. Flynn effect. The Flynn effect refers to the consistent upward drift in IQ test scores across generations, which has been documented to be approximately 3 points per decade. There are a lot of hypotheses on why this happens, but right now the most accepted one says that it's a consequence of several interrelated factors. Generation effect. It's a phenomenon where information is better remembered if it is generated from one's own mind rather than simply read. Self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a prediction that comes true, at least in part, as a result of a person's belief that said prediction would come true. Golem effect. It's a phenomenon in which lower expectations placed upon individuals, either by supervisors or the individual themselves, lead to poorer performance by the individual. It's a form of self-fulfilling prophecy. Digital amnesia. It's the tendency to forget information that can be found readily online. Hawthorne effect. It happens when people, consciously or unconsciously, behave differently because they know they're being observed. Hedonic treadmill. Also known as hedonic adaptation, it's the tendency of humans to quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative events or life changes. Hostile media effect. It refers to the tendency for individuals with a strong pre-existing attitude on an issue to perceive media coverage as biased against their side. Hot-cold empathy gap. It's a bias in which people underestimate the influence of mental states on their own attitudes, preferences, and behaviors. Hypersonic effect. It's the controversial claim that although humans cannot consciously hear ultrasounds, the presence or absence of those frequencies has a measurable effect on their physiological and psychological reactions. Imposter syndrome. It's the phenomenon in which people doubt their skills, talents, or accomplishments and have a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as frauds despite external evidence of their competence. Those experiencing this phenomenon do not believe they deserve their success or luck. Irrelevant speech effect. It has been found that when someone needs to read and recall a list and there are other irrelevant sounds, especially speech sounds, the performance gets worse. This occurs even if the list items are presented visually and even if the background speech is in a non-existent language. Cupid doll effect. It's a term that helps to explain how a child's physical features, such as a lengthened forehead and rounded face, motivate the infant's caregiver to take care of them. Kuleshov effect. It's the phenomenon by which viewers derive more meaning from the interaction of two sequential shots than from a single shot in isolation. Lady Macbeth effect. It's a phenomenon in which people who have done something morally wrong feel the need to wash their hands or bodies in order to symbolically clean their conscience. Less is better effect. It's a type of preference reversal that occurs when the smaller alternative of a proposition is preferred when evaluated separately but not when evaluated together. Levels of processing effect. Deeper levels of analysis and understanding of a thing produce more elaborate, longer-lasting, and stronger memory traces than shallow levels of them. Matthew effect. Let's take, for example, how new readers acquire the skills to read. Early success in acquiring reading skills usually leads to later successes in reading as the learner grows, while children that fall behind might experience even more failures. This is because children who fall behind in reading will read less, increasing the gap between them and their peers and creating a kind of snowball effect. Microwave auditory effect. It consists of the human perception of audible clicks, buzzing, hissing, or knocking induced by pulsed or modulated radio frequencies. Misinformation effect. The misinformation effect occurs when a person's memory becomes less accurate because of post-event information. Naive realism. It's the human tendency to believe that we see the world around us objectively and that people who disagree with us must be uninformed, irrational, or biased. Negativity effect. It's a bias that even when of equal intensity, things of a more negative nature have a greater effect on one's psychological state and processes than neutral or positive things. Observer expectancy effect. It's a form of reactivity in which a researcher's beliefs cause him to subconsciously influence the participants or the results of an experiment to fit in with his beliefs. Outgroup homogeneity effect. It's the perception that outgroup members are more similar to one another than in-group members. Over-justification effect. It occurs when an expected external incentive, such as money or prizes, decreases a person's intrinsic motivation to perform a task. It happens because the activity shifts from the pre-existing intrinsic motivation to the extrinsic one. Once rewards are no longer offered, interest in the activity is lost, and prior intrinsic motivation does not return. Pluralistic ignorance. It's a phenomenon in which people mistakenly believe that others predominantly hold an opinion different from their own. In this phenomenon, most people in a group may go along with a view they do not hold because they think incorrectly that most other people in the group hold it. Pratfall effect. Highly competent individuals tend to become more likable after committing mistakes, making them seem more human, while average-seeming individuals tend to become less likable even if they commit the same mistake. Certainty effect. When presented with two options, one with a certain result and one with an uncertain result, people tend to choose the certain one, thus being risk-averse. When presented with two uncertain results, however, people tend to be more risk-taking. This happens because we give more weight to outcomes that are considered certain than outcomes that are just possibilities. Pygmalion effect. High expectations lead to improved performance in a given area and vice versa, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Rhyme as reason effect. It's a cognitive bias whereupon a saying or aphorism is judged as more accurate or truthful when it is rewritten to rhyme. Ringelmann effect. The Ringelmann effect is the tendency for individual members of a group to become increasingly less productive as the size of their group increases. This happens because people in a group tend to feel that their own effort is not critical. They tend to rely on their co-workers or co-members to furnish the desired effort required, and because of the diffusion of responsibility effect. There could also be a failure to coordinate individual efforts in a productive way. Self-reference effect. People tend to have better memory for self-relevant information than for other relevant information. Stroop effect. It's the delay in reaction time between congruent and incongruent stimuli. Sleeper effect. The sleeper effect is when a persuasive message from a less credible source becomes more persuasive over time as it becomes detached from the source's lack of credibility. Spacing effect. It demonstrates that learning is more effective when study sessions are spaced out. Subadditivity effect. It's the tendency to judge the probability of the whole to be less than the probability of the parts. Tamagotchi effect. It's the development of emotional attachment to machines, robots, or softwares. It is more prominent in applications that simulate or reflect some aspects of human behavior or characteristics. Telescoping effect. It refers to the tendency of people to perceive recent events as more remote than they are and distant events as more recent than they are. Tetris effect. It occurs when people devote so much time and attention to an activity that it begins to pattern their thoughts, mental images, and dreams. Ventriloquism effect. It's why speech sounds seem to be coming from a direction other than their true direction due to the influence of visual stimuli from an apparent speaker. Isolation effect. It predicts that when multiple homogeneous stimuli are presented, the stimulus that differs from the rest is more likely to be remembered. Well-traveled route effect. Frequently traveled routes are assessed as taking a shorter time than unfamiliar routes. Word frequency effect. Recognition times are faster for words seen more frequently than for words seen less frequently. Worse than average effect. It's the human tendency to underestimate one's achievements and capabilities in relation to others. Zeigarnik effect. It occurs when an activity that has been interrupted may be more readily remembered. Uncanny valley. The uncanny valley effect is a phenomenon where humanoid objects that closely resemble humans but aren't quite realistic trigger feelings of discomfort or unease in observers. Mass hysteria. Mass hysteria refers to a situation where a group of people experience similar physical or emotional symptoms without a clear medical cause. It often spreads rapidly within a community due to shared anxiety, fear, or stress rather than a contagious agent. Streisand effect. It's an unintended consequence of attempts to hide, remove, or censor information, where the effort instead backfires by increasing awareness of that information. I've opened a Patreon. Click on the link in the description if you want to support this channel and end up on this list.